Hello and welcome back. This is our second video for chapter 10 on growth. Once again, my name is Miss Delia, and if you're ready, let's continue with the lesson. So in the previous video, we've already gone through 10.1 and 10.2, and in this video, we're going to go into growth patterns. Here are the learning outcomes for this subtopic, and as you notice, we are doing a little bit of compare and contrast between several types of growth curves, or also called growth patterns in this subtopic. But before we go into the comparison stuff, let us start by talking about what's a growth pattern. So a growth pattern shows changes in the number or the size. When we talk about size, it can mean height or volume, etc., of an organism or population over time. So the pattern of growth are usually shown by curves. Dalam arti kata lain, nama saja growth pattern, okay, dia menunjukkan corak ataupun trend, tapi essentially dia adalah curve lah, ada graph yang ada curve. Okay, so in this subtopic, we're going to look at 5 growth patterns that are kind of significant and what we want you to learn about, which is these 5. So you'll learn about limited and unlimited growth, and we're going to compare a little between limited and unlimited growth. And then you'll learn about isometric and allometric growth, and a few examples for each of those. And you'll learn about the 5th type of growth pattern, which is intermittent growth curve. So when we learn through this, okay, lebih kurang macam kamu tengok 1 dan 2, kita boleh bandingkan antara 2 ni. 3 dan 4, kita bandingkan antara mereka. Nombor 5 is just on its own. Okay? Alright, so let us continue with the lesson itself. We're going to look at each of these growth patterns, and we're going to start with first growth pattern, the limited growth curve, which is also known as definite or determinate growth. So these are plants that have been decided they'll only live for a certain amount of time and then they will naturally die. Okay, ini adalah pattern pertumbuhan untuk tumbuhan yang memang sudah tetap jangka hayatnya. Okay, so it is a growth that does not continue throughout life. It will end at death. These are usually organisms or plants that complete its life cycle in 1 year. So if it's a plant that completes its life cycle in 1 year, we will start when it germinates, and then it will grow, it will flower, it will produce seeds, and then eventually it will die. The curve or the graph for this one will show a sigmoid-shaped curve or an S-shaped curve. Examples of these are annual plants such as peas, corns, and paddies. So as you can see in this next slide, you have the curve of these annual plants that is exactly the same as the sigmoid curve that we learned about in 10.2. It has a lag phase, a log phase, decelerating phase, and a stationary phase. It's more or less the same, it's just moving with it through the seasons. Okay, so that's pretty much it for limited growth curve. Now we'll look at the second growth pattern, which is unlimited growth curve. So tadi adalah yang terhad, sekarang adalah yang tidak terhad. Unlimited growth curve is also known as indefinite or indeterminate growth. The organisms that show this growth pattern can grow and reproduce for many years. They have relatively long lifespan and they can live for many numbers of years. So we're not talking about just like 10 years. It can be hundreds or even thousands of years if left alone. Examples of plants that show this unlimited growth curve are tropical plants such as pokok cengal, pokok meranti, pokok durian, etc. So these plants, they have no maximum fixed size. If you leave them alone, they're just going to keep growing as much as they can. So they'll continue to grow until they are restricted by environmental factors, such as the presence of parasites or if people go and cut them down. They can survive periods of unfavorable condition for growth. So yeah, like this picture of this rainforest down here, if you leave them alone, these trees are going to keep growing until they are limited by other environmental factors. And this is what the curve of a plant that is showing unlimited growth curve looks like. So there's 2 lines that you need to pay attention to here, which is the red dotted line and the blue average growth line. We'll look at the red dotted line first. If you're looking and tracking the sizes and the changes in size of the tree throughout the year, then you're going to notice that the growth curve of the tree is actually going to follow the red line. It shows a cumulative series of sigmoid curves. Means ada masa yang pokok itu akan membesar dengan lebih cepat, ada masa yang dia akan membesar dengan lebih perlahan, and then cepat, and then perlahan, and then cepat, and then perlahan. Okay, so every cycle it's going to slow down and speed up, slow down and speed up. So one of these curves will represent 1 year's growth. Setiap lengkungan ini adalah 1 tahun. So the tree will increase in mass and size every year, and that's why the curve keeps going up. Why do we have a red line and a blue line is because after we connect all these sigmoid curves together, you see that you can actually get the average growth of that tree in 1 year. Okay? Data untuk sigmoid curve ini mungkin setiap bulan atau setiap minggu kita pergi sukat. Tapi kalau kita ambil average untuk 1 tahun tu berapa tinggi dia meningkat, then you can get the data for the blue line. The growth in unlimited growth curves is corresponding to 4 seasons. During spring and autumn, you have moderate rate of photosynthesis and small increase in the plant growth. So masa spring and autumn, kalau tempat yang ada 4 musim, okay, dia adalah masa untuk tumbesaran yang slow sedikit. During summer, there is high rate of photosynthesis and large increase in plant growth. Masa musim panas, tempat yang 4 musim, itulah masa yang pokok akan membesar dengan lebih cepat. Sebab banyak matahari, banyak fotosintesis, lebih cepat membesar. And during winter, there is low rate of photosynthesis and minimum growth. Musim sejuk, sikit matahari, so tidak banyak fotosintesis, sikit saja dia akan membesar. Ataupun dia tidak membesar langsung. So this is reflected in each of the sigmoid curves. So if we're looking at this curve here, okay, asalkan dia naik secara mendadak, itu adalah summertime. And then it's autumn, winter, and spring. Summertime, autumn, winter, spring, and so on and so on. So each of this curve is 1 year. Now, that was the explanation for a plant that is in a place with 4 seasons. But you will see this kind of curve in tropical plants as well, okay? Tumbuhan yang di sini pun, kalau kita track betul-betul lah tumbesaran dia, kita boleh dapat curve macam ini juga, tapi mungkin dia punya gradient lebih landai. Kenapa saya cakap di iklim khatulistiwa tropical ni pun boleh ada growth curve yang banyak sigmoid macam ni? Sebab walaupun kita di sini tiada 4 musim, tapi kita ada juga musim tengkujuh, ada musim kemarau. So certain times of the year it's gonna be faster growth in these plants, and certain times of the year it's gonna be slower growth. So although the gradient is lesser or not as steep, we will still see a difference in the growth rates. Okay, so that is it for this curve. In this next slide, we see an example of a tree that has unlimited growth curve, which is, in this case, it's a redwood. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the scientific name right. Sequoia sempervirens, which is also called a general Sherman tree. So this particular specimen is 83.8 meters, and the diameter of the trunk is over 2 meters. So this tree is definitely showing unlimited growth pattern. It just keeps growing taller and taller every year if nobody comes to cut it down. Okay, so that's it for limited and unlimited growth curve. So you can see that the organisms that show these two types of curves have some similarities and some differences, and they may live in the same area, but they have really different growth patterns and for different reasons. All right, so now we're moving on to growth pattern number 3. In growth pattern number 3, we're moving more towards animals. So in this one, we'll look at isometric growth curves. So isometric growth, iso sama, metric measurement. It means the organism's organs grow at the same rate as the rest of the body. The increase in the body length is proportional to organ size. Simple cakap, semua organ dia membesar pada kadar yang sama. Bukan cakap kepala lebih laju, badan lebih laju, no. Semua organ membesar pada kadar yang sama. The relative proportion of the organs and whole body will remain the same. So when we say the relative proportion of the organ and whole body, proportion maksudnya perkadaran. Ataupun kita boleh juga cakap, the kepala compared to the rest of the body is like berapa persen of the head. Separuh of the whole organism ke, one-fifth of the whole organism ke, that kind of thing. Okay, so the relative proportion of organs and the whole body will remain the same as the organism grows. The changes in size as the organs grow is not accompanied by the change in the shape of the organism. So, sambil organism tu membesar, size organ dia membesar, bentuk organism tidak tidak berubah. So, as the organisms grow, size increases, remains proportional, but there is no change in the body shape. So, some examples of organisms that will follow this isometric growth curve is fish, grasshoppers, and lizards. So in this slide, we'll look at how the proportions on a fish is the same as when it grows into an adult. So you can see here, when the fish is still a juvenile, the external structure of the fish will retain its shape as a result of proportional or equivalent growth rate as it grows into an adult. So kepala dia di sini, begitu juga dibandingkan dengan keseluruhan badan. Bila dia besar, kepala dia begini juga bila dibandingkan dengan keseluruhan badan. Alright, so we'll also look at it in grasshoppers. So grasshoppers, they go through what insects go through. Dia ada cangkerang yang keras kan. So they go through these stages called instar. We'll look at that later. But basically, from the first nymph instar to an adult stage grasshopper, the growth rate of all parts of the body will occur at the same rate as the overall growth of the grasshopper's body. So the whole body growing, all the organs growing at the same rate. I think that is quite simple to grasp. So now we're going to look at growth pattern number 4, allometric growth curve. So allometric growth curve is when the growth of certain organs are at different rates from each other and from the overall body. So that means organs and body will grow at different rates. The increase in body length is not proportional to the organ size. Jadi walaupun seekor organism tu semakin membesar, tidak semestinya paru-paru dia pun ikut membesar. Contohnya. So this change in the size of an organism is accompanied by the change in the shape of the organism. Organ dia membesar, bentuk organism akan berubah. The shape will vary among individuals of a given age and sex. So although that person, for example, or that cat or that dog is the same age and the same sex, they can have different appearances, different body shape. The internal features of the organisms will also change as the body grows. There will be change in the body or external shape or features of the organisms. Okay, so the example that we're going to look at in this subtopic is human organs. Kita akan fokus kepada perbezaan kadar tumbesaran organ berbeza dalam manusia. So, let's look at the first point when it comes to human organs. In the embryo, the brain and the head will grow and develop rapidly in the early phase, but the hands and feet will develop completely in the later stage. So means, pada awal masa kamu baru embryo yang sangat kecil, kepala dengan otak membesar duluan. Kadar tumbesaran untuk tangan dan kaki pada permulaan pregnancy adalah perlahan. In the later parts of the pregnancy, so contoh second and third trimester, the growth rate for the head and the brain is slower, but the growth rate for your hands and feet will be faster. So di sini kamu boleh nampak kadar tumbesaran untuk otak dengan kepala berbeza dengan kadar tumbesaran untuk tangan dengan kaki. Alright, so looking at the second point, okay, it changes the structure of skull from the fetus to adult as well. So when you are a fetus, some parts of your skull will change, will look different than when your skull is looking as an adult. So this is what is another point that we point out, okay? So dalam allometric growth curve, first point is that organs grow at a different rate compared to body. Number 2, it will be accompanied by a change in shape of the organism or change in shape of the external body. So kamu nampak di sini ada perbezaan dari segi bentuk tengkorak. All right, second point, reproductive organs grow little in early life but rapidly during adolescence phase, which is at puberty. This is something we already covered during chapter 9 when we talk about the reproductive systems of males and females. When you are in the embryo, your reproductive organs grow very fast. When you're in your childhood, in your infant years, nothing really happens to your reproductive organs. But when you reach your adolescence, they are going to grow really, really fast compared to the rest of your body. So there's another set of organs that we can talk about when it comes to allometric growth in humans, which is the lymphoid tissues. So ini adalah tissue-tissue dalam sistem limpa kamu. Your lymphoid tissues are going to grow very rapidly during your childhood, but they will grow slowly during your adolescence because lymphatic tissues are needed to boost natural immunity in childhood to defend against diseases. So masa kecil kamu memang senang jatuh sakit, tapi tidak apa sebab masa kamu kecil lymphoid tissue kamu sedang membesar dengan mendadak dan badan kamu boleh hasilkan banyak antibody untuk melawan penyakit yang kamu terhidap. Okay, so these lymphatic tissues are going to grow a lot during your childhood compared to your other organs. When you reach adolescence, the growth rate of your lymphoid tissues would have slowed down because by this stage, an adolescent or a person already going through adolescence, okay, seorang remaja, already has their own immunity. So at adolescence, the growth of lymph tissues is less needed. So examples of other organisms that can experience this allometric growth curve are whales, elephants, birds, and basically any mammals. So when we continue to this next slide, this is the same points that I was telling you about earlier. Okay, ini adalah point yang sama dengan tadi, cuma sekarang kita tengok dia dipaparkan dalam bentuk graph. So you see here, you can look at this graph on your own. There is the final size of the organs on the pink line. And then the red line will show the head size. Lymphoid tissue will show how much of your lymphoid tissue is in your body at that stage. And the blue line shows the size of your reproductive organs at those particular stages. The red line is showing the relative growth curve of human as whole body. So yang red line itu mungkin kita boleh katakan adalah kamu punya volume, size badan kamu dari kamu lahir sampai kamu meninggal ataupun sampai kamu dewasa. Okay, that is how much it's going to grow. Okay, so if you ever see this curve, you know it will be talking about allometric growth in humans. Another diagram that they will use to talk about allometric growth in humans is this chart that shows the different proportions of your body at different stages in life. So ini yang saya cakap tadi pasal perkadaran, proportions of your body parts. So when you are a fetus, a 2-month-old fetus, you look like this very strange alien on the left. That means when you are fetus, your head is like half your body size. When you are 4-month-old fetus, your head is about, 1/5. I don't know how much this is. About 1/3 of your body. When you are just born, your head is just about 3/4. As you're a child, the rest of your body grows longer in proportion to your head, and so on as you're a teenager, and later as you're an adult. Okay? Kalau kamu tidak mau hafal banyak pasal gambar ini, just know that this gambar is to show allometric growth in humans. Okay, so that is it for isometric and allometric growth. So biasa kita banding bezakan antara isometric growth yang organ dengan keseluruhan badan bertumbuh pada kadar yang sama. And we compare that with allometric growth, where different organs will grow at different rates compared to the body. So that brings us to the 5th growth pattern and final one for this subtopic, which is intermittent growth curve. Intermittent means terputus-putus. So intermittent growth curves is a discontinuous growth produced by the changes in the life cycle. The growth is discontinuous because it is interrupted by a series of molting or ecdysis. Since I mentioned molting and ecdysis, you know that this is going to refer to animals with an exoskeleton such as insects and certain shelled sea life. So this will occur in hemimetabulous. Hemimetabulous means they are organisms that have incomplete metamorphosis, and holometabulous, or organisms with complete metamorphosis, arthropods. Okay, so we're going to look at hemimetabulous and holometabulous later. We'll just focus on the fact that arthropods or insects will show this type of intermittent growth curve. So let's look at this curve. Looking at this curve, you see dia macam tangga-tangga. So bila dia rata means you cannot measure the growth, okay? It's staying the same length. Bila dia naik secara mendadak, itu adalah masa di mana dia membesar. Okay, so this growth will occur rapidly until it is limited by the hard exoskeleton. Bila masa untuk dia membesar, yang part of the graph where it's going straight up, it continues until it fills up the hard exoskeleton. The growth is limited by that hard exoskeleton. The exoskeleton is made of chitin until it is the molting stage or until ecdysis takes place. Due to the presence of the exoskeleton, arthropods need to undergo molting periodically during growth. Okay, so this is example of insect that is undergoing molting or ecdysis. Arthropods can only grow when they are molting, which is when ecdysis occurs. After molting or ecdysis, the growth rate increase. So ini yang saya cakap dia naik secara mendadak. The growth rate will slow down when the exoskeleton hardens. So no growth will be experienced when the exoskeleton fully hardens. So bila dia keluar daripada dia punya cangkerang lama di sini, okay, isi dia adalah sangat lembut. But over a few days, the skin will start to harden and form the new exoskeleton. So the only time for it to grow is before the skin starts to harden. Okay, so yeah, once again, you can see this graph, but with more details now. After reaching the adult stage, the arthropods do not molt or grow anymore. So when it is fully grown, the final form, dia memang akan stay the same length until it dies. But before adulthood, sebelum dia fully grown, untuk setiap tetangga ini, setiap step ini, stage pertama yang dia tidak membesar itu digelar sebagai instar. The stages in between molting or ecdysis will be called instar. So, yang mendatar instar, okay, this red point, circled in red, is a point of molting. And then instar, molting, instar, molting, instar, molting. Final stage is not called instar, it's called adult. Okay, so the intermittent growth curve is steps-like shape. Dia bentuk tetangga. Okay, so here, if you're looking for a proper way to explain what is an instar and an ecdysis, di sini adalah dia punya explanation panjang. Apa yang berlaku semasa molting, apa itu instar. Tapi basically, I already told you, ecdysis is that thing that's happening over there, where it's coming out of its old exoskeleton. Okay, before we continue with the rest of the points, I would like to point something out with the next two graphs that we're going to see. So have a look at this one. This is, of course, still showing intermittent growth curve, but look at the parameters and the shape of the curve. So, dia punya time memang hari. The parameter is length. So, what is the length of this insect in day 1? What is the length of this insect in day 2? And so on. Okay? So, you see, if we're measuring the length, dia mendatar saja, lepas tu naik, mendatar, naik, mendatar, naik, mendatar, naik. But there is another type of graph for intermittent growth curve that looks like this. So, as you can see here, this graph is a little bit different than the graph I showed earlier. In this one, the parameter is the fresh mass of that organism. The time is still days, but you see here, dia punya garis, dia macam menaik sedikit, dia bukan mendatar. looking over here. So you see, the line goes up a little bit, then straight up a little bit, straight up a little bit, straight up a little bit, straight up little bit, straight up a little bit. So dia punya tangga macam ada sengit sedikit. Okay? Why is that? Once again, I'm pointing you to the parameter. Ini dia timbang dia punya berat basa. So although the organism, this insect, is not growing in size because the exoskeleton is limiting it, that doesn't mean the cells inside is not growing. The cells inside the insect is still growing, just that it cannot become bigger, but it can become heavier. So take a look at the graph before you answer any questions regarding intermittent growth curve. Okay, so this is also showing intermittent growth curve based on mass. This one is showing an organism that is going through metamorphosis. Okay, so it starts out with eggs. When it's eggs, doesn't really measure the weight, and starts out with little larva, little pupa, and go on and go. Oh, sorry, this is not a larva, this is a nymph. Okay, it slowly grows into different shape, into different shape, into different shape, until it finally reaches an adult stage. So although it's kind of still soft, okay? Biasanya kita fikirkan pasal intermittent growth curve ni, kita fikirkan dia punya adult stage yang sudah keras. Tapi actually, masa dia pada macam metamorphosis yang macam ini pun, kita masih boleh kira dia sebagai intermittent growth curve. Okay, so just now we talked about complete metamorphosis and incomplete metamorphosis. So this is the comparison between complete and incomplete. Complete metamorphosis will occur in holometabulous arthropods. Incomplete metamorphosis occurs in hemimetabulous arthropods. Okay, one of them has the 4 life stages. The complete metamorphosis is what you learn about in primary school with the butterfly, dari telur jadi larva, dari larva jadi pupa, dari pupa jadi adult. Okay. Incomplete metamorphosis is when it goes from egg into nymph into adult. So this is like grasshoppers and cockroaches will follow this incomplete metamorphosis phase. Okay, nymphs are basically the baby version, but they look like the adult, just smaller and no wings and no immature sexual organs. Okay, so this is a better picture to show you the difference between complete metamorphosis and incomplete metamorphosis. All right, so yeah, another picture, complete metamorphosis compared with incomplete metamorphosis. All right, so that is pretty much it for 10.3. A very quick summary of the chapter before we close lessons for this semester. Okay, so this is chapter 10 on growth. First, we talk about the definition of growth. We have 2 definitions, but we usually use the first one. And we also talk about how to measure growth of an organism. Usually, we use the dry mass and the wet mass. And then in 10.2, we talk about what is absolute growth curve and absolute growth rate curve. Something I don't show here is in absolute growth curve, we talk about the sigmoid curve and also the human growth curve. In 10.3, we talked about 5 different growth patterns, which are the limited growth curve, unlimited growth curve, isometric growth, such as in fishes, versus allometric growth, such as in humans. And last but not least, we talk about intermittent growth curves. And of course, I also asked you to look at, is the parameter referring to the size of that organism or the weight of that organism? Okay, so that's pretty much it for this subtopic, for this chapter, and for this semester. So what should you do now? Well, we're not completely done with chapter 10 yet, so please make your own notes in 1 A4 page. In your notes, please include the definition of growth, what is dry mass and wet mass, and also include simplified versions of the graphs and relevant examples of each type of growth pattern. And then you can try to answer the tutorial questions for chapter 10 and submit your works in the Google Classroom. We'll discuss this in the next tutorial class that we have. That's pretty much it from me. Thank you very much for your time and attention, especially throughout this whole semester, and I will see you again soon. Thank you, and bye.